Every image should be edited. In this video, I will tell you why, what, and how. Image editing tips coming up. Hi there, I'm Peter Forsgaard, an Olympus visionary and a professional photographer from Helsinki, Finland. I hope you all are well and have not catched the virus that everybody is talking about, and it's also affecting quite a few of us. And I'm of course talking about the coronavirus. We all might have some extra time because there's no sports on television, there are no live sport events, all the leagues on different sports are cancelled or postponed, mostly cancelled, no concerts, no theater, no movies, everything is closed. And as I said, we might have some extra time on our hands. And why not learn something with that extra, or why not learn during that extra time and use it for learning? Is that what I'm trying to say here? And in this video, I'm going to talk about image editing, which is a really important part of digital photography. Let's first talk about the difference between image editing and image manipulation. Image editing is when you adjust exposure, contrast, color tones, white balance, and all those things that you can globally do to your image. And I will explain what the global editing means and what a local editing means, or local adjustments and global adjustments. Those are the basic things that you can do. But if you talk about manipulation, then we talk about adding stuff to the image, adding elements, taking out elements of the image to make it something else. Like a composite image, that's manipulation. And I'm not saying that there's something wrong with manipulation. It's one part of the process. And if you're a hobbyist and everyday shooter, you can do whatever you want to your images and manipulate them, edit them the way you like. Of course, then if you're a professional, there might be some limits. And especially in journalism, you cannot manipulate your image. You can only edit the image. And when we edit the image, we most likely have a goal that the image will look as it looked when we took the image. It will look the feeling that we had when we were making the image. I think that's our goal when we do image editing, which this video is all about. Why we do editing is because every image out of the camera is kind of like a starting point. It's a raw image, and I'm not talking about the file format, but it's a raw image that needs to be adjusted because there's only one camera that can do out of the camera images, and that's Pen F, because it has some built-in image editing capabilities. But we're not talking about that. We'll be talking about regular digital cameras. Even though you shoot RAW or JPEG, you need to slightly adjust your images. The first thing, of course, is trying to make as good original image in your camera so that you have correct exposure, your composition is the way you want it, and you have the white balance correct. And those are the most important things to get correct in camera. Of course, white balance can be adjusted if you do raw images. With JPEGs, it's one of those three that you need to have spot on. That way, you will have the best possible original file to work with, and your result will be better. It will help you if you have some kind of a pre-vision of your image that you are making. That will help, but it doesn't mean that you really need to know exactly what your image is going to look when you're making it with the camera. Because, of course, it's always experimenting. You have something, and then with image editing, you might end up with something else. But it's a good start to have some kind of an idea and pre-visualize the end result. That will help also, and it will make the image editing a lot easier when you have a kind of like a direction where you want to go. If you don't have any clues what you want the image to look like, it might be a bit harder to start the editing process. But let's start to talk about the editing process and what are the things that I like to do to my images. After you have transferred your images into your computer, you will have the hardest part: how to choose the best images. And that's of course up to you how to choose them, because that is the skill that is really hard to explain. I could actually explain it if I was to see your images and then see what are the best ones. But there's one thing that makes choosing the images a bit tricky. When you have taken the images and you come to your computer and you transfer the images to your hard drive and then start choosing right away, you will have an emotional feeling about your images. You have the feeling about the actual making of the image, and that can kind of distract you from making your right decisions. You might not choose your images according to the photographic rules or best images that might look good to others because you have a personal feeling to a certain image, and that especially if you are photographing your loved ones, because all of those images are great, but you might not see them in a objective eye, which is always important. And that's why if you have some problems choosing your images, let them be for a week and come back to those images and then make the decisions which ones you will choose, because it's no use of first of all saving all your images, and second, to edit all your images. I've never really understood people who take 500 images and edit all of them. That's ridiculous. I think you should choose the best one. The way I do it is first I label them red. I press the button 6, which is called the chosen ones. And then when I've chosen them, I filter them out so that I only see those images that are marked red and I don't see anything else. Then I start picking the second round when I will rate them with stars. Then I will edit those images. And after that, I start editing the images, and I always start with the global adjustments. Global adjustments means that the adjustment that I make will affect the whole image. And the local adjustment means when I'm adjusting them locally. I will explain it a bit more later in this video. But what it means that I'm only editing one part of the image. The first thing I do, I start with cropping. And as you can see on this image, the cropping isn't perfect. Cropping that I do is usually fine-tuning my composition. Sometimes I don't need to do this at all, but it depends on the image. Like this one, I need to do some cropping because I don't think I made the best possible cropping when I was making this image. Thing to do is to check the white balance. And what I usually do is I use the white balance picker, and then I will click on a fairly neutral gray or white on my image. If there is no gray or white in the image, then I will just make a adjustment with the sliders. And remember that white balance is always a subjective thing. You might want to have a warmer image, some might want to have a cooler image. And when I click with this in Lightroom, usually the result is a bit too cool or blue to my tasting. So I always add some more warmth to the image with the white balance slider in Lightroom. The third thing that I do is adjust the exposure. As I said in the beginning, that the most important thing is to get your exposure right when you're making the image. When you're clicking the shutter, be sure that the exposure is correct. And as you can see the histogram on this image, I've exposed this all the way to the right. So this image will have all the possible and all the available information that my sensor can capture. But it's a bit too bright. I need to lower the exposure a bit. And as you can also see that the histogram doesn't hit the left wall or whatever, which is black. And so I need to add some black on this one too. And lowering the exposure also will make the noise less visible. But if you need to make your image brighter, then what you need to do is to increase the exposure, which is not something that I recommend. If you need to do that, then try the white slider first and see to make the whites brighter in the image. That will sometimes help, but it won't introduce or reveal that much noise if you use this slider called white. And also adjusting the exposure, you need to sometimes adjust the highlights or the shadows and the blacks. These are the things that you should always check after you've chosen your images and start editing. The exposure, that's the most important thing. And the fourth thing is contrast. And this is something that many of you do not do or adjust, because if you are exposing to the right like you should to have all the information in the image or that the sensor can capture, then the image will look bright and flat. And that's why you need to lower the exposure, as I just explained, but you also need to add some contrast. And how much contrast is up to you. That's something that you have to decide, because some like little flatter images and some like more contrasty images, and it also depends on the image. But always add some contrast. That will make the image a lot better. If you don't do anything else but add the contrast. And the fifth thing is that I always add dehaze to the images. This is something also that you need to decide how much you want. If you overdo it, it will ruin the image. But slight increase in dehaze will make most images a lot better. It will make the image look sharper, and also it will get rid of if there is some haze in the image, like it says, dehaze. These were all the global adjustments that affect the whole image. There's one thing that I sometimes do is saturation and vibrance, but it depends on the image if I want to do it or not. But then let's talk about the local adjustments. Local adjustments are adjustments that are done only to a smaller part of the image. The reason that we do this is that if we increase the exposure or make the image brighter or darker, it will darken the subject and the background equally. But if we want to make the subject pop out, it needs to be a bit lighter than the background. So by using local adjustments, we can affect only the background, or we can affect only the subject. It depends on which way we want to do it. I usually like to make image as bright as possible and then lower the exposure and lower the exposure of the background a bit more than the subject. And this can be done with either a gradual filter tool or the adjustment brush tool. That's up to you which one you want to use. Or it's actually the radial filter tool can also be used for this one. It depends on how you want to use it. And these tools need to be used or practice their use so that you know how they work and which is the best way for you. Remember that always it's about you, how you want to make. This is only an example how I like to do my images. And the important thing in these are that you will have a workflow. That's why I think the steps that you go from exposure, contrast, etc., so that you remember to do everything. Sometimes you might need to go back a bit, let's say to the contrast. You added a bit too much when you have added dehaze and stuff like that. But usually going these as a step by step, you will get a better result. But let's go back to the local adjustments. The reason that we want to make the subject brighter than the background is, first, it will pop out because it's lighter, because our eye works the way that when we look at the image, we will see the brighter part first and also the sharpest part first. And that's why it's wise to make the subject pop out a bit. It will make the image more interesting. You will tell the viewer what to look in your image. If it's all flat light, you don't really have a place for the eye to rest. And that's why it's important to have these darker areas and lighter areas in the image. It will be more interesting if you don't only have like a flat light that everything is gray. Remember that it's always important to look the image before you start adjusting it. You need to decide, of course, you've decided when you're making the image what is the main subject of the image. Where do you want your viewer to go with his or her eye? Where does the eye lead the viewer? And that's a really important part before you start making the image, and then before you start making the image editing, because that will guide you and help you to decide which part of the image should be lighter and which part should be darker. And it's not easy, but it will when you start practicing. And then, of course, this was just a brief kind of like a video about the workflow. But if you know the workflow, these things work in every image editing software. The local adjustments can be something that it's not in every image editing software, but the global adjustments are. So learn and practice, and you will have better images in the end. And now that you might have more time, because as I said, there are no sports, no concerts, maybe you should learn and take advantages of the free time and learn some image editing. But hey, Thanks for watching and bye for now.